Hello learners, welcome to this another session of Certificate in Fashion Design program. I Dr. Divya Ojha welcome Academic Associate from Fashion Design School of Vocational Education and Training welcomes you all. Today we will be discussing on the topic pattern information and marking, which is a unit of course 2, which is pattern making and sewing of block 1, and this is unit 4 of this particular course we will be discussing today. The first of all we will discuss what is pattern information and what is the importance of pattern information and why it is used and why it is important when we go for the pattern making and for the garment construction. Then we will discuss marking on the patterns. When you go in the industry and you are studying fashion design, so you should know what different types of marking are used on the pattern and how these markings are done. Then we will talk about specification sheet. So when you are designing and you are developing a pattern and it is given for the final production, specification sheet is very important. So we will discuss every point, importance and steps for developing a specification sheet, and then we will discuss about the grading of the pattern, how if a pattern is developed and we have to develop different sizes or range of particular pattern, then grading of that particular pattern is done. So we will discuss how grading is done and what it is important. First, just look at our end of our previous sessions, what we have completed and done. So in the previous session we discussed about the unit 3 of this particular course, which is on body measurement. So we discussed body measurement and its guidelines. We explained the process of taking body measurement. There are various steps and the process in which we can take a correct body measurement for creating a good pattern. So we explained the process of taking body measurement. We defined about the size chart, its importance and standard body measurements. So these all points we have covered in the earlier sessions. Now first just look at what are the learning key objectives or learning key points of this particular topic we are discussing, which is pattern information and marking. So when you will go through this unit or this topic, you can recognize and illustrate pattern information. So when you go through this unit and study this unit, you will be able to recognize and understand why pattern information is very important when you are in designing field. Then you can identify and measure different ease amounts, how many ease, what type of ease is given on a particular pattern. So you can identify and measure different ease amounts. Then you can demonstrate production pattern marking and different marking symbols. What are different production pattern, how we develop a production pattern, and what all different markings or the symbols are done on a particular pattern. So first of all we will discuss about seam allowance. So when we talk about the seam allowance or allowance, which in our daily or easy language we can say the margin or the gap which is between the stitching line and the edge of the fabric. So seam allowance is given on every garment we wear, seam allowance is there. So when we talk about the seam allowance, we say seam allowance are the margin given around the working pattern. So if you remember the earlier sessions or you have gone through, so when we take a body measurement and we create a pattern, so we discuss that the working pattern the pattern we make, it is without any seam allowance or without any ease. So it is just the body measurement what we have taken. So when we take a body measurement, we create a pattern, and when we go for the garment stitching and first cutting, so when we go for the cutting, we just put some seam allowance on that particular pattern to get the fabric or get the garment prepared to be easy to wear and be comfortable. So seam allowance are the margin given around the working pattern. Then they will help you to hold two layers of fabric together and stitch. Seam allowance are made by drawing set measurement on the outline of the. In the picture you can see that the pattern we have developed for the body's front and body's back and the sleeve. So you can see when it is you can see outline of that particular pattern, we can see some one extra line, and that line is said as the seam allowance we are talking about. The amount of seam allowance varies from straight area to the curve area. If a garment if we talk about a shirt or a kurta, when we say it is seam allowance for the side, so side part of that particular garment or the curve part like armhole, so the seam allowance which is given at the side part of the garment or at the curve part at the garment, it will vary according to the garment. So it also varies with the special features added to the garment. If we are creating any extra features or extra design to a particular garment, the allowance or the seam allowance varies according to that particular design or the creativity we are doing. So you can from the picture it is clear that the pattern we develop, and from the line of that particular pattern we have the working pattern, we give one extra allowance or extra line we say as a seam allowance. Then when we develop or when we give the seam allowance, then after creating, seam allowance can be of like it depends, generally we give half inches or 1 centimeter of allowance we give to make the fabric very easily to be when we develop a garment, it should be comfortable to wear. Then truing of seam allowance, when we give the allowance on the pattern, it is very important to make it for the truing of that particular seam allowance. So seam allowance once drawn need to be trued. Truing is important at the beginning and end of the seam and should be seamed. Like when we give the seam allowance and while we are stitching, it should be trued. Then to true a side seam fold seam allowance to the garment and run trace wheel at the armhole curve. So while with the using of tracing wheel or the tracing wheel we use to create or we use to true the seam lines. Then once the final pattern are made, it is not necessary to have the stitching line marked on it. And moreover, in the production, it is not possible to mark seam lines on all the layers of the cutting. Marking notches, like what it says, when we create a pattern and we go for the bulk cutting at the production house. So when we have a many layers of the fabric, we cannot make a marking of seam allowance on every pattern or every cutting piece of the fabric. So what we do, we make markings or symbols like notches we do, which is depicts that from this point we have to give the join the fabric and we have to give the seam allowance. So you can see like there is some symbols on the dots explains that this amount of seam allowance to be given, and you can see a small arrow marks which is the symbol of notching. So notching means that from this point we have to join the fabric and from this point we have to give the seam allowance. So this is how when you create a pattern, these all markings if we do on the pattern and we forward it to the next production department, by seeing that simple symbols on the pattern, they understand that from this point we have to give the seam allowance, from this point we have to join these two pieces of the fabric, and then they go for the cutting and stitching of the final garment. So this is why seam allowance marking or symbol is important, notching symbol is important for the pattern information. where how we have to write if we are created a pattern and we have to give that particular pattern for the final production at the production house, we are giving for the stitching section of the production house. So what all information is very important to be written on that particular pattern, and with how it should be written that the person who is going to use or who is going to cut the fabric or the stitch for the stitching of the fabric, he or she should understand it very easily. So first there are two types ways we can write a pattern information. One, it can be written information, and one, it can be a symbol or the markings which we have done on the pattern. So first we will talk about the written informations. What all important information is required to be written on a pattern, so that the person who is using that particular pattern can understand it easily and construct a garment. So first is the name of the garment, like what we are preparing. If we are preparing a pant, if we are preparing a skirt, so we have to write the name of that particular garment. Name should be mentioned on that pattern information. Then the second information we need is the name of the pattern pieces, like how many pieces of, or whether it is the front piece or whether it is the back piece of that particular garment. It is the, if we are giving the sleeve pattern, we have to write that particular name of that particular piece, like sleeve or the front bodies or the back bodies or the front skirt or the back skirt. So in this way we write the name of the pattern pieces. Then size of that particular pattern, 32, 34, 36, and so on. Then the next information which is important, we write the center front or center back, like this is the which pattern it is, because if we have discussed about the creating of basic bodice block. So in basic bodice block or the skirt block, we create the two parts, the front part and the back part. So which part of for the garment that particular pattern is, so it should be clearly written on the pattern we have developed, whether it is the center front or the center back part. Then style number or code number of the pattern. Style number or code number we can give according to our choice, whether if we are having a, if you can give it by your name, or if you are running a small fashion house, if you have any brand name, it could be brand name or the pattern pieces. So this is how we can give the style number or the code number of the pattern. Then number of pieces to be cut, how many pieces of this particular pattern you want to be cut, it should be clearly mentioned. Then from the, like we have discussed about the written informations, what it is written on the pattern. Then comes the marking and the symbol. It's like some, when we create a pattern, when you will practice after going to through the practical manual of this course, you can understand what marking and symbols are. So there are particular marking and symbols for each thing or each guideline we want to give to the pattern maker, or when we are developing a pattern. So first is the size selection line, like size selection line, which size we want for this particular pattern. Then we have the cutting lines, like if you see a pattern image, if you see a pattern image on the, there is one cutting line and there is one stitching line. When we you see the stitching line, it is marked as the dotted lines, and when you see the stitching line, you see the dotted broken lines with the mark of the scissor. So it is very clear by seeing that symbol that this is the cutting line and this is the swing line. Then we have the swing line as we discussed. Then we have the arrows, like which is the which shows the direction of the grain line on which the fabric we will cut, or the direction of the pattern we are using. Then we have the burst point on the particular pattern, like if we have the bodies, we give a straight line on the horizontal way to mark it as a burst line. then we have the cut on fold line, like when we have the different layout of the fabrics. So we make the on fold. If we want to cut the fabric straight way, it is given the marking as a straight way. If we want to cut as folded line, it is marked as a folded. Then we have the marks of darts on the particular pattern. We have the mark of grain line, as we discussed. We have the marking of notches and placement line, which gives that direction that from this particular point we have to join the fabric, and this particular point we have to place the fabric on place the pattern on the fabric. So these are the different symbols when we use on the pattern, which guides the pattern maker or the person who is going to stitch at the production house, and they easily understand all the informations and do the necessary action according to that particular information, all which is provided on the pattern, which makes the work easy, and they can create the garment very perfectly. So you can see on the image, like on the first image, all the information is written, like where is the bust point, where is the cutting line, where is the dart line, and this is how we do all the marking and the written information on the pattern. Then it comes the specification sheet. This is the information what we give on the pattern, and what all information we include together, it is said as the specification sheet. Specification sheet is also, like in the short form, we called as a spec sheet, or the information guideline, we can say it. So it is a document sheet indicating all design details and specification stitching, and it specifies stitching details to the minutest area, like what small, like from talking about to the pattern to the stitching, what type of buttons have to be used, what type of threads have to be used, all that information is given on this particular specification sheet. So we can say sheet are important for designer to specify all details to the production department. We are designers. What big designers do, they create a design and they prepare a spec sheet or a specification sheet for that particular design, mentioning all the information, like which type of fabric they want, which type of color they want, texture they want. Like in this picture you can see in this graph, like student name or the style name you can write, style name or the brand name you can write. You can write the code number of that particular garment or the design you want. You can write the style number is included, and for which season you are preparing that garment. Or then we have the comment, or the comment type, in which we mention the for whom this particular design is developed, or for which type of pattern fabric we want to be used in this particular design or the final garment. So on the particular specification sheet we also add some type of swatches of the fabric we want to be used for the fabric garment construction. So swatches is there, description of the fabric is there, then content, like it should be the cotton or which type of cotton fabric we want to use, then construction of the particular fabric, whether it should be the plain weave or the some twill weave, which type of weave of the fabric should be, then how many trims we want, or the accessories what we want on the particular garment, hooks, lining, zippers, all the information, all the minutest things we want, like from fabric to trims we discussed, as we discussed, all information is mentioned in this particular specification sheet. Then let us see what specification sheet will contain following informations. Then first we discuss is the sample of the fabric in right color. Like if we want, there are different shades of a particular color. So what particular shade we want of the particular fabric. So we put a swatch of particular fabric, and which color we want, we mention it, or we give a sample of that particular color very specifically. Then samples of trims and accessories with indication of their placement on the garment, like where we want which type of trim. If we want buttons, where it should be on the placket, or it should be on the back, or it should be on the sleeve, where the buttons should be, where the zip should be. Every placement is explained very carefully. Then flat sketch of the garment with front and back view. Like if we have designed a sketch of that garment, what we want to make garment for, so we make a sketch of that particular garment in both the views, like front view and the back view, so that the maker who is going to develop a garment understand easily from where we have to give which type of accessories, or from where we have to adjust the fabric. Then measurement of the ready garment. So what measurement, body measurement for whom we are going to develop, or what standard size we want the garment to be made for. Then opening in the garment, from where the opening of the garment will be, whether it should be on the back, or whether it should be on the front side, or it should be on the side. Then stitching thread quality, what quality of the thread we want, whether and what type of the thread we want, like if we want the cotton thread or the polyester thread. The quality of the thread is also mentioned, for which should be used for the stitching. Then size of stitches is also mentioned, because if we do not mention, they just stitch on the particular or the standard size. So it should be should be also mentioned in the specification sheet. And seams to be used, like if for every fabric we use different type of seams, so which type of seams we want to be used on the particular fabric. And if any other details or any other information you want to give, you can write on that particular specification sheet. This was all informations points which are included in the specification sheet. Then this is how a standard specification sheet looks like, mentioning all the information, front and back view of the particular design we are given for constructing a garment, swatch of the fabric including the colors and every detail. We have to discuss is grading, how grading of a particular pattern we do to create numbers of particular pattern. Then we can say grading is a term which is used for the systematic increase or decrease of a pattern size. Like in the earlier session we also discussed about the size chart. So size chart and grading is almost similar. So grading, from where we increase or decrease the standard pattern. So this is done to achieve a pattern in a number of sizes. It is done using standard set of measurement. The purpose of pattern grading is to develop a range of sizes from the design sample, including shape and fit and aesthetic appearance. Like as we discussed in the size chart also, if we go for buying a garment at a brand shop, we get a number of size range of particular garment. So how this is done, they create a they create a standard pattern, and then from that standard size or that standard measurement, which is we recognize or we set after many researches or sample we collect from the population, and then we set a one standard size, and on basis of that particular standard size we do grading of that particular pattern of different ranges, and we get range of that particular pattern. So it includes all the design samples, shape, fit, aesthetic appearance, all that point is kept in mind while creating a grading. Then grading is of two types. First, we can say it is a draft or multi-size grade. Like when we create a draft, we do grading at that point of time, or we do multi-sizing, or we increase and decrease the particular draft according to the standard measurement. And the second is the track grade or single size grade. Like we have the single size and we develop the another size using that particular standard pattern. So these are the two types of the grading. So in this picture you can see or understand the concept of grading. Like on the first picture we have the one particular pattern of standard size and pattern of 30 size, and then we want to increase the size. So what we do, we just increase the size from the side part, armhole, and the waistline, from the waistline, but we do not do the grading from the neckline part and the shoulder. So this is how grading of a particular pattern is done, and we get a number of sizes or range of a particular garment. So this is how grading is done, and we develop a different number of sizes. So this was all we discussed in the in this session. We discussed about the importance of pattern information. We discussed how written information is mentioned on the pattern, how symbols are put on the garment to understand the pattern. Then we explained the specification sheet and its use in the pattern making. And finally, lastly, we discussed the process of grading on the pattern. So hope this session was useful for you, and see you in the next session. Thank you.